There's a global order, a system that was carefully put together over 75 years, all to prevent another world war. What if I told you that entire system was being threatened by a single letter? Well, that's exactly the story we're diving into today, a diplomatic firestorm that's putting decades of global stability right on the edge.
So, it all kicked off with this, an absolutely stunning message. A letter from the U.S. National Security Council shows up on the desks of European ambassadors, and it contains a blunt ultimatum for Norway's Prime Minister. The U.S. demands complete and total control of Greenland. And the reason given? To make sure the world is secure.
You can just imagine the reaction, right? It was immediate and total disbelief. Journalists, diplomats, everyone was scrambling to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. The BBC's Faisal Islam really summed it up perfectly when he confirmed what so many people couldn't get their heads around. This was not a parody. This was really happening.
So what was actually in this letter that set off such a massive uproar? Let's get into the details, because the fallout tells you everything you need to know about how wild this whole situation really was.
Okay, so experts in international affairs immediately start picking this thing apart, and the mistakes they found, well, they were just staggering. Journalist Anne Applebaum pointed out that it confuses the Nobel Committee with the Norwegian government, and then it confuses the Norwegian government with Denmark, which, is a completely different country. And on top of that, it made these bizarre claims about ending 8 wars and just totally ignored that Greenland has been Danish territory for centuries. Applebaum didn't pull any punches. She called it the last straw. And listen, the alarm bells weren't just going off in the media. The whole conversation very quickly turned to political accountability. Jonathan Reiner, who was the former physician to Vice President Dick Cheney, came out and said that this letter was so serious it should trigger a formal, bipartisan congressional inquiry into presidential fitness. The concern wasn't just political, though. It was also moral. Some top American Catholic cardinals even put out a joint statement. Cardinal Blaise Cupich really got to the heart of it, saying that the U.S. now looked like it was abandoning the rule of law for a philosophy of might makes right. And that, for a global leader, is a really, really troublesome shift.
Now, to really understand why this is such a big deal, we need to take a step back. Why would a threat over Greenland cause a global panic? It's because it doesn't just challenge one country. It challenges the entire system that was built from the ashes of the deadliest war in human history. And that brings us right to the core of this whole thing. What exactly is this rules-based international order that everyone is so worried about protecting?
After World War II, a conflict that left 36.5 million Europeans dead, world leaders, with the U.S. at the forefront, basically said never again. It began in 1941 with some key principles in the Atlantic Charter. By 1945, that vision grew into the United Nations. And then in 1949, the NATO Defensive Alliance was born. The whole goal was simple: create a system where powerful nations can't just take whatever they want by force.
And this really shows you the two competing philosophies at the heart of this. On one side, you've got the post-war order, which is all about international law, cooperation, and defending each other. On the other side, you've got a might-makes-right world, full of unilateral action, conquest, and just seizing resources. This is the fundamental clash we're seeing play out.
And look, these aren't just some abstract, fuzzy ideas. They're written down right into the DNA of our alliances. The original NATO treaty makes it crystal clear that its purpose is to protect freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. It's a promise of mutual defense, but it's also a promise of shared values.
So, with all of that history in mind, now we can see this current crisis for what it really is. This isn't just some isolated incident. It's a direct challenge to that entire system we've just been talking about.
A big part of this challenge seems to be replacing the old institutions. There's a proposal making the rounds for something called a Board of Peace, which looks like it's designed to take the place of the United Nations. And get this, its draft charter would give the U.S. president permanent leadership, total veto power, and control over a $1 billion entry fee. So who's been invited to join this new board? Well, the Kremlin has confirmed that Vladimir Putin, who's currently under indictment for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, got an invitation. And so did his close ally, Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus, a man often called Europe's last dictator. Also on the list are Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Argentina's Javier Milei. All right, this all brings us to the very heart of the crisis. These actions have pushed the world's most powerful military and political alliance, NATO, into completely uncharted and, frankly, very dangerous waters.
For 75 years, think about that, 3/4 of a century. This system of collective defense, this idea that an attack on one is an attack on all, has been the very bedrock of global stability. It has worked, and it has successfully prevented another world war. But there is a counterargument. It's a worldview you hear from people like White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, and it pretty much dismisses the whole idea of alliances. This view claims that it's only American power, American money and blood, that keeps the world safe, and it completely ignores decades of shared sacrifice. It is the might makes right philosophy in its purest form.
And that brings us to the absolutely unprecedented conclusion of this story. Danish troops, these are the same soldiers who fought side by side with U.S. forces in Afghanistan for 20 years, have now been deployed to Greenland, and their mission to defend Danish territory from the United States. Let that sink in. A NATO ally is now defending itself against its most powerful partner.
So this is what it all comes down to. That post-war order was designed to stop powerful nations from just taking what they want by force. But that whole system, at the end of the day, was always built on a foundation of trust, which leaves us with a really unsettling question for the future. What happens when the trust that holds it all together finally breaks, and allies become adversaries?